Have you ever thought about how some stories, quests for justice, they just don't seem to fade away even after decades pass? It's easy to think, well, if a case goes cold, that's it. The answer's a loss. But sometimes maybe the pieces are just waiting for the right time, the right person to finally click them into place. And that's exactly what we're getting into today. We're doing a deep dive into the remarkable resolution of a 1988 cold case, the murder of Deborah Atrops in Oregon. It's a tragic story, but one that saw justice in 2025 with the sentencing of her estranged husband, Robert Atrops. So our mission here is to unpack what happened. What were those critical details, those breakthroughs that took this from cold to closed?
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on a recent news report. It pulled together information straight from the Washington County DA's office, plus local news outlets. So it lets us follow that whole thread, from the tragedy itself, through that incredibly long wait, and finally to how it all resolved.
All right, it sets quite a stage. Okay, so let's rewind. Back to 1988. Deborah Atrops and Robert Atrops, they were having serious marital issues. Our sources mention a history of physical abuse, documented abuse, and they were separated. They had adopted an infant daughter pretty recently, but Deborah was planning to divorce Robert, actively planning it. And it wasn't just quiet tension, right? Friends, coworkers, they'd seen things, domestic violence behaviors before she died.
And this is where those personal details become, well, frankly chilling. And looking back, absolutely critical. The source material highlights that Deborah had started dating someone else, a coworker, and crucially, she told friends that the defendant had confronted her about the relationship, adding she was worried he would kill her, that specific fear shared with others.
It paints a really stark picture of the situation.
That's haunting, especially knowing what happened. How often does that happen, though? A victim actually saying they're afraid and that becoming key evidence maybe decades later in a cold case. It's more common than you might think for those kinds of statements to surface in investigations, but their weight can vary a lot. What makes Deborah's statement so powerful here is the consistency and the context from other witnesses. These weren't just throwaway lines, they fit a pattern. And when investigators looked at them again years later, alongside everything else, it gave real insight into motive, into the dynamics. It's almost like her voice reaching out from the past,
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, let's move to the night itself. November 29th, 1988. Around 7 p.m., Deborah leaves a hair appointment. She's planning to go to Robert's house, her estranged husband's place, to pick up their daughter. Then, maybe 2.5 hours later, like 9:30 p.m., Robert Atrops starts calling people, friends, family, saying his wife is missing. He claimed he made those calls from his home phone.
Right. But here's where things start to unravel, even back then. Investigators figured out later he wasn't actually home when he made those calls reporting her missing. So for an investigator, what does a discrepancy like that mean? I mean, it's a red flag, sure, but what are the challenges when it's not quite concrete proof yet?
Oh, it's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
Immediately suspicious. It suggests, maybe trying to build an alibi or cover up where he actually was. The big challenge, particularly in '88, was connecting that kind of behavioral flag to solid physical proof. Without that link, it sees a strong suspicion, but it's tough to build a solid case just on that. And that seems to be what happened here initially.
Exactly. And things escalated quickly from there. Just 2 days later, December 1st, 1988, police get called out to this remote construction site over in Beaverton. They find Deborah Atrops' car. The license plates are gone, and her body is inside the trunk. The medical examiner confirmed it manual strangulation, and signs of physical assault, too. And her clothes were apparently covered in mud. That detail becomes important.
And even though Robert Atrops first told police he hadn't seen her that night, well, like you said, his story had holes. It wasn't fully backed up. So, despite the initial investigation, the case eventually went cold. For decades. So what happened? What finally kicked this investigation back into gear after all that time? What was the breakthrough?
The real turning point seems to have been 2020. A new detective was assigned, took a completely fresh look at everything. And this wasn't just, reading the old files. This detective went out, found more witnesses, uncovered new information. The source specifically says additional items from the original investigation were sent off for new forensic tests. So a renewed focus, definitely, but also crucially, access to modern science.
Right, and that's where the forensic evolution really shines, things that were just impossible decades ago. For people listening who follow cold cases, they know getting usable DNA from, say, 1988 evidence, it's not like taking a fresh swab today.
Yeah.
What kind of hurdles are we talking about with evidence that old? And how did the modern techniques actually get past them?
That's a great point. I mean, finding Robert Atrops' DNA on the coat she was wearing, That was huge, precisely because of those hurdles. After 30-plus years, DNA breaks down, seriously degrades. Temperature changes, moisture, light, you name it. The key now is likely in how they extract and amplify it. The methods are incredibly sensitive today. They can work with tiny, tiny amounts, even if it's degraded. What might have been useless back in '88 can now give a full profile. It turns lost evidence into a direct genetic link.
That's incredible. But it wasn't just the DNA, was it? Prosecutors also found the mud on Deborah's car was, quote, indistinguishable from the mud collected at the defendant's home. Now, when they say indistinguishable, are we just talking like it looked the same color? Yeah. Or is this much more technical forensic geology stuff?
Oh, way beyond just looking similar. When forensic geologists use a word like indistinguishable, they're talking sophisticated analysis. They look at the specific mineral makeup, unique organic bits, even microscopic plant stuff in the soil. It creates a kind of environmental fingerprint, you know? It can geotag a sample to a specific spot. So in this case, it provided this really strong physical tie between Atrops' home and Deborah's car, which was found, remember, at the dump site.
Wow. And then the detective found something else that added another piece.
Yeah.
Robert Atrops sold roofing materials at construction sites. And here's the kicker, near where Deborah's body was found. So that connects him to the location in a way that maybe wasn't fully clear before. It ties his job into the whole picture.
Exactly. And if you step back and look at it all, it shows how these different pieces, some maybe seemed small before, like tiny mud particles or a job detail, how they can suddenly lock together with new analysis and just dogged detective work. It wasn't one single thing like a smoking gun. It was the combination, the cutting-edge DNA, that detailed soil work, and these context clues that suddenly mattered a lot more. And then apparently in 2022, they interviewed Robert Atrops again, and the DA's office noted significant discrepancies from his version of events in 1988. So those original inconsistencies, they were still there, maybe even stood out more against all this new evidence.
And all that work, spanning almost 4 decades. It's finally led somewhere. April 2025, a jury finds Robert Atrops guilty, second-degree murder, and then just this month, July 8th, 2025, he got a sentence. Life in prison. Possibility of parole, but only after 25 years. Though it sounds like his lawyers were planning an appeal, which, is pretty standard in these situations. So bring it all together. What does a case like this tell us about justice, really? It's not just about persistence, though that's huge. It feels like a reminder that truth, even buried for decades, can find a way out. The key things that solve this? Well, it was definitely that detective's persistence, reopening it, not giving up, and then the science, obviously, the DNA, the soil analysis, things unimaginable or just not refined enough in '88. And finally, witness testimony. New people, or maybe re-interviewing old ones with fresh eyes.
Absolutely. And what strikes me is how those really personal things, the history of domestic violence, Deborah telling friends she was scared he'd kill her, they weren't just background. They became core evidence. They foreshadowed the tragedy in a way that resonated even years later, providing that crucial context and motive. This case really makes you think about how time impacts our view of a crime like this, or maybe how it doesn't. Can you imagine just waiting all those years for answers? What do you think keeps a family going through something like that?
Yeah, that's the profound tragedy in cold cases, isn't it? I think often what keeps people going is just hope. Hope that someone, somewhere, hasn't forgotten. Hope that maybe new tech or just a fresh perspective will finally bring answers. The justice system can be slow, painfully slow, but the goal is closure, even if it comes incredibly late. And facts, even dormant facts, they can suddenly speak up loud and clear when the right tools and the right focus are applied. It is a powerful thought. So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something to maybe chew on. In a world where old information can constantly be re-examined with new tools, new understanding, what does cold case even really mean anymore? Is a case ever truly forgotten by justice? Or is it just waiting for that right moment, the right person to light the fire again and find the truth?